Well, good day to you. This is Too Hot for Radio. It is good to be back. This is our first episode of 2020. We had a break over Christmas, and since coming back, it's all been a bit crazy with all the other obligations that we have. But I am in the studio with Stuart Reynolds. Stuart, are you well?
Yes, it's nice to be back. I've been brought back in from the naughty steps, so thank you for having me back.
I guess you're referring to our last podcast, which was about Father Christmas, and there was the shock revelation that you actually are Father Christmas, or you were at least up until Christmas. And so you're back with us now, which is good. And we are going to talk today then about something that's been on my mind for a while, really, what it means to actually be a man. A biblical man, a true man, a man after God's own heart. What does that look like in our current climate? And so, Stuart, you identify as a man. Should we be talking about this?
Absolutely. I often say, above all the thrills and experiences that I could be a part of and experience and witness in ministry, is when I see a man going after God, because as a man, I know what that means. I'm committed to manhood, and that might seem an obvious thing to say because I'm a fella, but I think that we do live in a day where men are just not stepping up. I've been saying for years that the biggest problem in the United Kingdom is the same as the biggest problem in the local church, and that's men. Men who will not be men, men who are wimps, men who want to be men in the wrong sort of way. I lived for 12 years in Northern Ireland. To be a man in Northern Ireland, in many respects, is to walk with the Orange Lodge and to start building your bonfire at the end of May for July the 12th. And we saw all these big so-called men guarding their bonfires and all the rest of it. That is not what it means to be a man. A man is not a bully, and a man is not a king. As a husband and a father, above all things, I believe that I'm a priest in my home, that it is my responsibility to lead my family, not dominate my family, but to lead my family in the ways of God.
Yeah.
And so as a man, I don't know, that might be difficult. You say, well, Stuart, it's obvious and it's easier for you because you've been a pastor, but, you know, I would say to parents, you don't send your children to church, for example. You bring your children to church. My children have caught, if you like, myself and my wife praying together and reading the Bible. We need men to be priests in the home, to be men of God in the home. 1 Chronicles 12 verse 32 talked about the men of Issachar who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. That's the kind of man I want to be. I want to be, above all things, I want to be a man of God.
Amen. I thought it was interesting you talked there about the stereotypes. It seems to me currently there are two separate stereotypes of men today in our society. The one side is the kind of the stereotypical macho man, the man who can handle his drink, man who can handle himself in a fight, is domineering, taking control, trampling on anyone in his way. The stereotype of the guy who's got no issues, he's not got anything to share, he's not going to open up with anyone. It's just, you know, a man's man, a true man, and anyone who isn't that is a kind of a wuss. But then I think in the media, a lot of films and TV and stuff, there's this other perception that men are completely stupid and thick and can't do the basic tasks. And so you've got the remake of Ghostbusters, and instead of the men now going out and catching ghosts with the pretty female receptionist waiting back in the office, it's now been remade with all the leading roles are now women, and it's a quote-unquote pretty man who's the receptionist in the office. I saw an advert online, I don't know if it's been airing in the UK, but it's got Charlize Theron in it, and she walks into a bar and she orders a Budweiser and gets poured into a glass, and she hears kind of some louts, some men kind of shouting over a pool game. She goes over, and while holding a glass of beer in one hand, she wins a game of pool one-handed. She wins a game of darts one-handed, doesn't spill a drop of beer. She then beats a man at arm wrestling, doesn't spill a drop of beer. She goes back over to the bar, sits down, and she hears someone else making some kind of cheering noise and kind of looks again like, here we go. And then she goes to get up again to go and sort the issue. These men who can be beaten at pool with one hand and can be beaten in an arm wrestle. Are there women that are strong enough to beat a man? Yes, but not Charlize Theron and not the average. I don't think the average woman is able to beat the average man at arm wrestling. But it's this kind of idea that men are stupid and thick and actually they're weak and they need all the help that they can get. You know, you think of cartoons like Simpsons, Homer Simpson. You got Peter Griffin from Family Guy. Even Daddy Pig. For a long time, we're into Peppa Pig. And, you know, Daddy Pig is actually a loving guy, and he's around more than a lot of dads, let's be honest, in the household. But he just can't do anything. If he gets in a car, he's going to crash it. If he looks at a map, he's going to get lost. If he looks at some instructions to make something, it's not going to go well. Peppa Pig is going to laugh at him, and Mummy Pig's going to come in and save the day. And so we have these two opposing stereotypes of the strong, drinking, football-supporting, kind of not really caring guy, and then the other is the absolutely useless waste of space. The reason we have women in the world is to just correct all men's mistakes. And so I think neither of those really are helpful, because I think the Bible talks very differently about what a true man, what a real man should be.
The first stereotype is not a man is a lout. Really. And what you've described there about the trends of society, there's a simple reason for that, and that's because men have abdicated their manhood. If you even take it, it's even come into the local church. One of the things that we've been talking about dealing with in these podcasts, which we haven't got round to yet, is the role of women in ministry. Now, we're not going to get into that today, but
yeah, no, we do need to talk about it.
There's a conversation that needs to happen before that, and that is, would there be a need for women in the local church to be doing all these things if the men were stepping up to their responsibilities? How many local churches in this country would still be open if it weren't for the females in them? Men are abdicating their responsibilities in the home and in society.
And it's depressing, isn't it, that you look back to the creation story and you look back to Adam and Eve and you see that abdication that you mentioned is exactly the sin of Adam, I think, isn't it? That he is held responsible as much, if not more, than Eve. It's Eve who is deceived by the serpent. But then later in Scripture, it talks about the sin of Adam, the first sin. What was it? It was that I think that he had abdicated his responsibility. He'd checked out. And actually, instead of stepping forward and leading in that situation and speaking for his family and defending his wife ultimately from the tricks and the schemes of the devil, he doesn't do that, and he sits back, and so we're seeing that play out today in homes and in the church. I think you're absolutely right. I imagine you've probably been in a number of churches where you look out and you think, like, why is it that the people least engaged, the least interested are the men? Why is it that seemingly it's the women that are most spiritually attuned? It's the women who are ready to pray. It's the women who in a sense, have kind of dragged their men to church. I find that so embarrassing that I'd see that as a complete reversal of what Scripture says, that it should be the husband who is lovingly leading. And I think that's one of those areas that I think I'm called to with my wife, is to take the initiative. And that is to take the initiative in terms of prayer in the home. That's to take the initiative in terms of talking with my wife about things of the Lord, and with my children. And with my dad growing up, I can remember taking my dad cups of tea when he was fasting because he wouldn't have an evening meal with us. You know what I mean? I remember that vividly. That kind of thing sticks with you, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The problem with a lot of men is that they want privileges of being a man without responsibility.
Yeah, that's
now,
true.
I mean, if I take you to Ephesians 5, well-known verses, verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Goes on to talk about the family, but listen to this, verse 22. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he's the Saviour. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. And, there's females who would say they have a big problem with that. But let me tell you, lady, if your spouse, if your husband is a man of God, you will not have a problem submitting to him, because that's the context. Submit to your husbands as to the Lord.
Absolutely.
The context is in the Lord. Here's the next bit. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. It's been well said that the wife is to love her husband so much as to live for him. That's a privilege. But the husband is to love his wife so much as to die for her.
Yeah, my wife's always defended the fact that she chose the old vows that says to honour and obey. She said to honour and obey me, and some of her friends were furious at that, and she took them straight to Ephesians 5 and said, I've got the easier, you know what I mean, this is far easier for me than it is for my husband, because he's going to love me like Christ loves the church. He's going to lay down his life for me. And you're absolutely right, it is a privilege to, women should not submit to a man who is not living for Christ. Not a perfect example, I get, but obviously this has been used, hasn't it, by fallen, evil men in the past to say, however I'm living, whatever I'm doing, you have to submit to me. That isn't what.
But that's the privilege without the responsibility. Yeah. And then if I take you to 1 Peter chapter 3, I'll not read the first 7 verses, but the first 6 verses talk about the holy beauty of a wife. Really, it's an echo, those verses of Proverbs 31, isn't it? You know, and about the wise woman and whose children rise and call her blessed. But then verse 7 says this, husbands, in the same way be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. If I am not being a man of God and priest in my home and father to my children and a faithful spouse to my wife, my prayer life is dead. That's what it says, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. And perhaps I would say to fellas listening to us today, that if you're professing Christ but you feel that your prayers are not being heard, maybe you need to look at your life before your children and your wife, because there's a direct connection there, isn't there, between how the husband treats the wife and thus the children, and to his prayers being hindered or being fruitful. I think there is nothing more compelling than a man of God. In more than one place, Jesus talked about being meek, and to be meek is not to be weak. The right definition of meekness is power under control. And in the Greek, one of the pictures behind the Greek word is of a horse being brought under control, not unbridled and out of control, but you think about the power of a horse being brought under control. And that is the meekness to me, of masculinity. There's power there.
Yeah.
We can force our way. We choose not to, because there's power that is under control there. This is a devotional by Charles Swindoll titled Endangered Species. He says, remember when men were men. Remember when you could tell by looking. Remember when men knew who they were, liked how they were, and didn't want to be anything but what they were. Remember when it was men who boxed and wrestled and bragged about how much they could bench press. Remember when it was the women who wore the makeup, the earrings and the bikinis. Remember when it was the men who initiated the contact and took the lead in a relationship, made lifelong commitments and modelled a masculinity grounded in security and stability. I'm talking about men who are discerning, decisive, strong-hearted, who know where they're going and are confident enough in themselves and their God to get them there. Men who aren't afraid to take the lead, to stand tall, firm in their principles, even when the going gets rough. Such qualities not only inspire the respect of women, they also engender healthy admiration among younger men and boys who hunger for heroes. We need clear-thinking, hard-working, straight-talking men who, while tender, thoughtful and loving, don't feel the need to ask permission for taking charge. I think he's spot on there.
Oh, he's a good one, isn't he, Chuck Swindoll? I love that hunger for heroes.
Yes, I would say to all the fellas listening to us, why don't we commit ourselves in 2020 to a New Year revolution, to seek after being men of God. And, wives, can I put it this way? If you want your husband to be a man of God, why don't you start by being a woman of God and praying for your husbands, and children, pray for your fathers, and be praying for our pastors as well.
So you're talking about a New Year's revolution, and I guess we're already a few weeks into January. Many people who have made New Year's resolutions have probably already given up. I did see some article that said 2/3 of people who tried to do dry January, so giving up alcohol, have already failed at that. So we're talking not about resolutions, but a revolution for men. We've already said what it isn't. We've said the stereotypes are wrong, and often men's view of what it means to be a man is wrong. What is the right view then? What does it mean to be a biblical man? How can we be godly men?
Well, that's a good question. One thing I would say in regard to New Year's resolutions, I always think we put too much on New Year. The fact is, every 24-hour period is a lesson in resurrection. So every day is a new day. My dad used to carry these words in his wallet: today is the first day of the rest of my life. And so we can start this revolution today. The thing is, nobody else can do it for us. I do think it's helpful that as men we can, to a certain extent and in many ways, pursue God together. In the local church, there doesn't seem to be any problem getting ladies together for ladies' fellowships, and that is wonderful and absolutely right. But for men's groups, for men to get together as men and go out and play snooker, that's what we used to do in one of the churches I pastored, and we maybe go out and play golf or just go out for a walk. But I also think that men need to get together in a spiritual situation as well, not just socially, to talk, be accountable to each other. Obviously that doesn't come from nothing. I would like to read Psalm 1, if that's okay. And I'm not being sexist. We understand that, blessed is the man. We're talking about man and woman. But let's just be, for this occasion, in this context, let's take it absolutely literally. Psalm 1, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He's like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever he does prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff that the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. For better or for worse, I would say that is a great depiction, portrayal of a man of God or an ungodly man. The consequences of not being a man of God.
Absolutely. I think that accountability thing is something huge that I've tried to do that in recent times, and really there's only one guy who I feel like I'm close enough where whenever we meet we will take that time to confess our sins to one another. And I just think we've talked before about how confessing to God is necessary and important, but how God often uses other people in our lives to kind of say, you know what I mean, not acting in the place of God, but actually saying, I'm going to confess to you, knowing that I'm going to feel that shame more. And so I had my friend Gav over last night, and we began with that. We confessed our sins, and it was him particularly with something that he wanted to bring up. And the time before, it was something that had really, I felt like I needed to kind of get off my chest. And it's just amazing to be able to do that. And it seems, in a sense, so simple, but I've found that very rarely to be able to happen. And I don't know, maybe you found this, but it can often be difficult amongst church leaders, I think, who feel isolated and, in a sense, it's your job. And so what if you confess how you're not perfect in a certain area? What are the implications for you? When you were a pastor, were you able to have that kind of accountability relationship with anyone? Yes,
because you can't impose accountability. Particularly for young pastors, we were always encouraged, to kind of have a buddy system, because the pastorate can be an isolated place, but you can't impose that. I do think that you can seek after it, and certainly I have always tried, and God's been very gracious to me in this regard. He's always placed in my life good men of God. I can name some names, they mean a lot to me, but you have to allow that, you have to seek after it. That is not going to just happen. People have to earn the right to be able to speak into your life. I always say, in a more general level, that we need to be discerning, Not everybody, this is a wider application here, but I think it is pertinent to what we're saying as just a caution. Not everybody that comes into your life is a gift from God. Just because you're a Christ one, not everybody that comes into your life should just automatically be deemed as a gift from God. We need to be very careful who we talk to, who we take into our trust, and who we listen to. And that can only come by prayer. And in regard to myself, you're talking about Gavin, in regard to yourself, these are men of God. They are the real deal. They've proved themselves and they have earned the right to speak into our lives. And none of us are above that. And none of us are beyond that. I think it was John Wesley, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it was John Wesley that said there are no Lone Ranger Christians. And of course he was great with the bands and the classes. He was very much into mutual accountability, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I'm intrigued and inspired by the way that he made those kind of class meetings, which I guess we would be something equivalent today as our small groups or community groups or life groups. You know, he made that really at the centre of early Methodism. People meeting together very regularly to tell each other how you're doing kind of inwardly, how you're feeling in yourself, but also how are you in terms of externally, how are you in terms of sharing your faith, how much fruit are you bearing in your life. Name some of the areas where you're looking more and more like Christ, where are the areas where you need to improve. And some of that flowed out of these, I think it was 22 questions, wasn't it, that Wesley and his group of friends, which people kind of mockingly called the Holy Club. These 22 questions that they asked themselves every day and then discussed when they met in other groups. For me, at least, I feel like people characterise Wesley too easily as a kind of works righteousness type of faith and dismiss it. But I think that accountability was at the root, particularly at the beginning, of the Methodist faith. So let's think then a little bit more about that idea, what it means to be a biblical man. And I think similar to what you were saying about Psalm 1, I think this verse from 1 Corinthians 16 is similar to that in that it talks about men specifically. And I think you've got the old NIV, it probably does say men there, but I know some of the newer versions change the word here. So this says, 1 Corinthians 16 verse 13, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, let all that you do be done in love. We're standing firm in the faith, in faithfulness, be strong in the right way, and everything that we do be defined by love. And again, I think the word love has been so distorted in our society to mean that our view of love is always something namby-pamby or always something romantic or sexualized, but actually to love is to speak the truth. To love is to care and provide. And so I think for me, what does it mean to be a biblical man? What does it mean to be a true man is ultimately to protect and to provide, to take initiative, like I said earlier, to serve and to lead. So I'm looking to do that in the areas that the Lord has given me oversight of. So as an elder in the church that I attend, my call, I believe, is to protect and to provide, to take initiative, to serve and to lead, I guess to teach at points as well. And same in the home with my wife and with my family. The call is to protect, to provide, to take initiative, to serve and to lead. There's lots there, obviously, we can go into, but I think I desperately want to be a man after God's own heart. I want to be someone like David, who God says, when I look at all his life, I define him as a man who is after my own heart. I want to be like Abraham, although he was fallen and broken and made many mistakes. There's a number of scriptures that say he was faithful. He never wavered in his faith. And you think, wow, well, what about Hagar? And what about these moments of weakness? God looks at the entirety of Abraham's life and says, yes, he's fallen. Yes, he was in need of a saviour, but there was a faithfulness, do you know what I mean, that characterised the whole of his life. And that's what I want to be. That's what I long to be, to lay sin aside, to pursue the Lord, to protect, to provide, to take initiative, to serve and to lead.
Amen to that. And, I think there are ample examples in the Scripture about mentorship and accountability.
Yeah.
It's significant to me that when Jesus sent out the 72, he sent them out 2 by 2. Was the Apostle Paul not a mentor to young Timothy? There was 3 things I wrote down that I believe that would be helpful for us to do. This could well develop into a sermon for some other format.
Bring it.
3 things. As men, we need to fess up. When we've blown it, when we make mistakes, we need to say sorry. I have apologised to my girls more times than I can remember because of a bad temper or things that I've said that I shouldn't have said. And when we do mess up, we have to fess up. Second thing I would say is we have to show up. Somebody said this, that the home, the family is like a bank. It goes broke if you take out more than you put in. And when we're at home, men, let's be at home. I remember reading an article about men, and the article was titled, "Are You Really at Home?" And the picture above the article was of a man with his toddler son on his knee, but he was working in his computer at home. So he was home, but he wasn't really at home. So when we're at home with the family, we need to really be at home, not watching the football, not having the TV on, not on our Facebook or whatever, but we need to be at home and having physical face time, if you know what I mean, and hands-on time. So we need to fess up, we need to show up, and then we need to, and we've already mentioned this earlier in the podcast, we need to grow up. We know the kind of things, men, that we're talking about. We need to grow up and be men of God.
Amen. Amen. Well, let's bring this podcast to a close. I'd like to finish with a few verses from 1 Kings chapter 2, and I will pray and we'll finish there. It says this: "Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn, that the Lord may establish his word that he spoke concerning me." Father, we thank you for this time that we have shared. God, we do long to be men who serve you, who live for you, who follow you. And God, what a nation it would be if the men in this country who claim the name of Christ were to live in the ways that we've talked about. And we do pray that myself and Stuart would not be disqualified personally, in that we would, our actions would speak as loud as our words on this. And God, would you work in the men who are listening to this podcast? Would you bring about a revolution for your glory, and that we would see more men stepping into that place to lead, to protect, to provide, to serve in their families, in their workplaces, in the church as well. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, that's all, folks. Thanks so much for listening. Do remember to send any questions or comments that you have to info@gnba.net, or just comment on iTunes or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Remember, you can listen to it on Spotify and also on your Alexa now. For more details, do go to our website, gnba.net. What else was I going to say? Oh, yes, the Teaching Day. Good News Broadcasting, which is the ministry behind Too Hot for Radio, has a teaching day. Both myself and Stuart will be talking. We'll also have a live edition of Too Hot for Radio in the afternoon. If you would like to join us, again, do go to that same website address and you'll find all the details there. Me and Stuart will hopefully be back in about a week's time. Do hope you'll be able to join us then. See you later.